Building on Meridian Avenue had my name on it, not on the front door. I'm not the kind of man who puts his name on things. But in the county property records, in the LLC filings, in the lease agreements that went out every first of the month. Harold Covington Real Estate Holdings, LLC, right there, in black and white. My son thought he leased office space from a company called Meridian Property Group. He never thought to look up who owned Meridian Property Group. I suppose I should have expected that. You stop looking for the man behind the curtain when you've decided the curtain is all there is. There are different kinds of silence. I'd learned this over 68 years. There's the silence of a man who has nothing to say. There's the silence of a man who has nothing to say. There's the silence of a man who is choosing his moment. And then there's the silence I carried out of that restaurant on a Thursday evening in October. The kind that hums low and constant, like a refrigerator in an empty house. The kind that keeps things cold. My son's name is Caleb. He'll be 41 in March. I remember the day he was born, like I remember most important things, not as a story but as a feeling. The weight of him in my arms. The specific way he smelled. The thought that passed through me without warning. I would burn the world down for this. I kept that thought longer than I should have. When his mother and I divorced, Caleb was 14. It wasn't a dramatic divorce. There was no affair, no explosion. Just two people who had grown into shapes that no longer fit the same space. His mother, I'll call her Paulette, because that's her name, she moved on quickly. Within 2 years she was with a man named Richard, an orthodontist from Naperville who drove a new Audi every 3 years and had opinions about wine. Caleb liked Richard. Caleb liked the Audi. Caleb liked the kind of life that came with someone who drove a new Audi every 3 years. I drove a 2009 Ford F-150 until the transmission gave out. Then I drove a 2014 one. I was not by any external measure an impressive man. What I was, quietly, was the owner of 11 commercial properties in the greater Chicago area, 3 residential rental portfolios, a self-storage facility in Joliet, and a controlling interest in a small property management company I'd built from the ground up after the divorce. I had started with one duplex in Wicker Park in 1987, bought with money I'd saved working double shifts at a logistics company. By the time Caleb was insulting me at dinner, that duplex had become a small empire. He didn't know any of this. I hadn't told him. Looking back, I understand that was part of the problem. At the time, I thought it was wisdom. Keep quiet. Let the work speak. Don't wave your hand at what you've built. Just build it. My father taught me that. His father taught him. A man who brags about his money is a man who's afraid it might disappear. But there's a difference between humility and invisibility. I let myself become invisible to my own son. I set him up well. I want to be honest about that because this story doesn't have a clean hero. I set Caleb up, and in doing so I helped create the person who would one day look me in the eye across a dinner table and say what he said. When he was 26 and wanted to start a marketing consultancy, I bought the LLC. I put it in his name. I paid the first 2 years of rent on his office space through Meridian Property Group, which was mine, though he didn't know that, and I called it a loan we both knew I'd never collect. I put him in a condo in Lincoln Park. I paid his health insurance until he was 32. I told myself this was what fathers did. I told myself I was giving him a foundation, not a crutch. His business did grow. Caleb is smart. I'll give him that. He has a talent for reading rooms, for making people feel understood. He built a genuine client base. By his mid-30s, Callaway Consulting had 12 employees and a good reputation in certain circles. He'd done real work. I believed that. What I didn't account for was what he'd done with the story he told himself. In his version, he had built everything from nothing. He was a self-made man. The office space, the initial capital, the condo, all of it had been rewritten in his memory as either irrelevant or earned. He didn't lie about it consciously. I think that's almost worse. He genuinely believed it. And Richard the orthodontist, with his wine opinions and his odies, Richard had become the measuring stick. Richard had a lakefront property. Richard had a boat. Richard wore a watch that cost more than my truck. I became, in the geography of my son's mind, the lesser version The man who hadn't made it. The one who lived in a modest house in Oak Park and drove a Ford pickup and never seemed to have anything impressive to show for his years. I knew this was happening. I watched it happen the way you watch weather move across a flat landscape. Slowly, then all at once. I didn't correct it. That was my mistake, not the giving. The silence that let a false story grow roots. The dinner was in October. Caleb's wife, a woman named Priya, had organized a gathering at a restaurant in River North, the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on the version they hand to guests. Her parents were visiting from out of town. There were 8 of us at the table, Caleb and Priya, her parents, Suresh and Meena, 2 of their couple friends whose names I've already half forgotten, and me. I had driven myself. Parked the truck 2 blocks away without thinking twice about it. The evening started fine. I am not a difficult person to have dinner with. I ask questions. I listen. Suresh was a civil engineer who'd spent 30 years building infrastructure in 3 different countries, and I spent a good portion of the appetizers asking him about his work because it genuinely interested me. He was a quiet, serious man, and I liked him immediately. The trouble started when the conversation turned, as it often does at tables like that, to real estate. One of the couple friends, I'll call him Owen, had just bought a house in Wilmette. He was talking about the market, about interest rates, about how he'd managed to close before the rates climbed again. It was ordinary dinner conversation. I offered a few observations. I mentioned that I'd been watching the North Shore market for a while. I said something about cap rates and long-term yield. Caleb looked at me. That look. I'd seen it before. A slight tightening around the eyes. The look that says don't. But I wasn't performing, I was just talking, and Suresh had turned toward me with genuine interest, asking a follow-up question about rental yield calculations. And I was answering because he asked, and because I knew the answer. That's when Caleb said it. Not quietly. Not as an aside. Loudly enough for the table. Loudly enough for the people at the next table, if they'd been paying attention. Dad's always had big theories about real estate. He smiled when he said it. The kind of smile that's designed to look affectionate while doing something else entirely. He's been going to flip his first property for about 15 years. Hasn't quite gotten around to it. Suresh's expression shifted. He was too polite to react, but I saw it. Priya looked at her plate. Owen's wife laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound, and Caleb, my son, the boy I'd carried in my arms, the boy I'd written checks for and lost sleep over and quietly, methodically, built a world beneath without his knowing. Caleb leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who has just landed a comfortable joke, and he said, Priya's dad built 3 bridges in 2 countries. No offense, Dad, but Richard's done more with his money in 5 years than you have in 30. Some people are just built for it. The table went very quiet. I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I set it down carefully. None taken, I said. And I meant it. Not because it didn't land. It landed perfectly, exactly where he intended, but because somewhere in the space between his words and my response, something in me went very calm and very cold, and I understood with absolute clarity that the time for silence about who I was had ended. I just wasn't going to announce that at dinner. I drove home that night and I didn't call anyone. I didn't vent. I sat in my kitchen for a long time with a cup of coffee that went cold, and I thought about what I had made and what it had made in return. The next morning I called my attorney. His name is Gordon. We've worked together for 22 years. I told him I needed to review all the arrangements I had in place for Caleb. The condo title. The lease on his office space through Meridian. The informal understandings. All of it. Gordon didn't ask why. He's known me long enough. How thorough, he said. Complete, I said. I also called my accountant, and then I called the property manager who handled day-to-day operations on the Meridian buildings. Over the following 2 weeks I made phone calls. I signed documents. I did nothing dramatic. I simply began the process of dismantling, quietly and legally, every structure I had built beneath my son without his knowledge. The condo he lived in. He'd been paying rent to a property management company since Priya moved in. The company was mine. The rent was below market. I gave him 60 days' notice, standard lease terms, nothing he could challenge. The office lease for Callaway Consulting was through Meridian Property Group. His lease was up for renewal in December. I had Gordon prepare a renewal at current market rate. The difference was significant, nearly double what he'd been paying. I had Meridian send it through standard channels. I did not call him. I did not explain. I let the paperwork do the talking. He called me on a Tuesday in November. I remember because I was driving back from the self-storage facility in Joliet, and I had the radio on. Something low and forgettable. Dad. His voice was tight. I got a lease renewal notice from Meridian. There must be some mistake. They're doubling the rent. That's the market rate, I said. A pause. How do you know what the market rate is? I know the area, I said. Office space on Meridian Avenue has gone up considerably. Another pause, longer. I need to look into this. Do you know who owns that building? I've never been able to get a straight answer. I talked to your attorney, I said. He can look up the property records. Dad. Something changed in his voice. A question forming that he wasn't quite ready to ask. Do you know something about this? Have your attorney pulled the county records, I said. It's public information. I heard his breathing on the line. I'll talk to you soon, I said, and I ended the call. He figured it out 4 days later. I know this because Gordon called me to let me know that a request had come in for records related to Meridian Property Group and that a second request had followed within the hour for Harold Covington Real Estate Holdings, LLC, and that within 20 minutes of the second request, Caleb had called Gordon's office directly. Gordon told him he would need to speak with me. Caleb called me 6 times that evening. I didn't answer. I let his voicemails accumulate. I listened to them the next morning in order, like chapters. The first was controlled. Dad, I need to talk to you. Please call me back. The second was faster. I found something in the property records. I don't understand. Can you please call me? The third was where the controls started to slip. Is Meridian yours? Is the building I've been in for 4 years, is that yours? Dad, please. By the fourth, he was not controlling anything. You own my building. You own my condo. How long? How long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell me? What else is there? The fifth was quiet again, which was almost harder to hear. Just call me. The sixth was only 8 seconds long. He didn't say anything. I could hear him breathing. Then he hung up. I called him back that night. He came to my house. I made coffee, the same way I always make coffee. Too strong in a pot that's older than his consultancy. He sat at the kitchen table, and he looked at me across it, and for the first time in a long time I saw, underneath the man he'd become, the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with his head on my shoulder, watching Bears games. How much? He said. I told him, not everything at once, but the shape of it, the 11 properties, the storage facility, the management company. The approximate value, which I gave him as a range rather than a number, because it still felt like something private. He was quiet for a long time. The condo, he finally said. Yes. The office. Yes. The initial. When I started, the LLC. Yes. He put his face in his hands. Not crying exactly. Something else. A man confronting an architecture he built his identity around and finding out it was built on a foundation that wasn't his. Why didn't you tell me? He said. It wasn't really a question. I wanted you to have something that felt like yours, I said. I thought if you knew, it would change how you felt about what you built. You did build real things, Caleb. You did. The business is yours. The clients, the reputation, the work. That was you. But not the ground it stood on. No, I said, not the ground. He looked up. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady when he asked the next part. And now? The lease. Market rate, I said. December 1st. The condo? 60 days. Though the timing is negotiable if you need to find something. He nodded. Slowly. The way a person nods when they are trying to absorb something too large to absorb all at once. At the restaurant, he said, "What I said about Richard? That's not why I did this." Then why? I thought about how to say it. I'd had 2 weeks to think about how to say it, and I still wasn't sure I had the right words. Because you needed to know the truth about what your life was built on, and I'd waited too long to tell you. The restaurant just told me that the waiting was finished. You could have just told me. I could have, I said, but I think you needed to find it yourself. I think if I'd sat you down and said, "Here's what I have, here's what I've done for you," you would have found a way to minimize it, or to be angry about it, or to use it against me somehow. The records don't argue. The records just are. He was quiet for a long time. "I've been an idiot," he said finally. "You've been someone who believed a story," I said. "I helped write that story. That's on me as much as it's on you." He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. The house was very quiet. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the dark. "I need to call Priya," he said. "Take your time," I said. He stayed for almost 2 hours. We didn't resolve everything. You don't resolve decades in a kitchen conversation. But before he left, he stood in the doorway and turned back and said something I didn't expect. "Did you ever think about just telling me? Not as a kid, but when I was older. Did you ever almost say something?" "100 times," I said. He nodded. "I wish you had. I know," I said. "I know," I said. "I do too." Paulette called me 3 days later. She'd heard from Caleb. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's trying to be diplomatic and finding it difficult. A kind of compressed precision, like someone folding something that doesn't fold easily. "He's devastated, Harold." "I know. He feels like everything he built." "He built real things," I said. "I've told him that." A pause. "Richard thinks you were cruel." I let that sit for a moment. Richard, who had never gone without, who had inherited a practice, who had spent 20 years benefiting from the kind of structural advantages that don't show up in the story you tell yourself about your own success. "Richard's entitled to his opinion," I said. "Harold, Paulette, your son called me a failure at a dinner table in front of his wife's parents. He compared me to a man who has never in his life had to build anything from nothing. I don't need your ex-husband's assessment of my parenting." Another pause, longer this time. "He didn't know," she said quietly. "No," I said. "He didn't. And that's something I have to own. But what he did with his not knowing, the contempt in it, that was a choice he made every time he made it. For years." She didn't have an answer for that. We ended the call with the particular politeness of two people who share a history and have learned, over time, the exact boundaries of what can be usefully discussed. "I won't tell you Caleb and I are perfectly repaired. That's not how it works. He moved out of the Lincoln Park condo, found a place in Evanston with Priya, a good building, an honest lease. He renegotiated with Meridian, and we worked out terms that were fair to both sides, which is all I'd wanted. The business is his, legitimately, in a way it wasn't before. That matters to him. I think it's made him work differently. He called me on my birthday in January. First year in a long time he'd called without Priya reminding him. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. The Bears, a property deal I was considering on the South Side, a problem he was having with a client. It was ordinary. It was the most valuable 40 minutes I'd spent in years. I don't know what he tells himself now about who built what. I hope the story's more honest. I hope he's learned the way you could only learn certain things by living through them. That the men who don't announce themselves are not always the men who have nothing to announce. My father used to say, the loudest voice in the room is usually the most afraid. I thought about that a lot in the weeks after the restaurant. Caleb had been afraid. Afraid of not measuring up. Afraid that the life he'd built was smaller than Richard's. Afraid that his father was a reflection of something he might become. That fear came out as contempt. It almost always does. I understand it. I don't excuse it, but I understand it. And I understand my own part in it, the years of quiet that wasn't wisdom, just avoidance. The checks written in the dark. The pride that kept me from letting my son know, simply and plainly, what his father had built, a different kind of fear dressed up as humility. We were both afraid. We were just afraid of different things. The building on Meridian Avenue was still mine. I walked past it last week on my way to a meeting. It was a clear day, cold the way Chicago gets in February, the kind of cold that has an opinion about you. I stopped for a moment and looked at the directory by the front door. Callaway Consulting, Suite 42012. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Then I kept walking. There's a particular peace that comes when you stop waiting for recognition and simply know what you've built. Not arrogance, not pride in the showy sense, just the quiet, solid, immovable knowledge of a man who started with a duplex in Wicker Park and worked in the dark for 40 years. The cold doesn't bother me. I've been working in it my whole life. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, more time than I expected, honestly. When you're in the middle of something like this, the dinner, the phone calls, the paperwork, the long silences, it feels urgent. It feels like something that needs to be resolved, contained, explained. And then the urgency passes, and what you're left with is just a plain truth of it, sitting on the kitchen table like a cold cup of coffee. What I kept coming back to was this. Actions don't disappear, they accumulate. Every check I wrote in the dark, every time I let Caleb believe a story that wasn't fully true, every moment I chose silence when I should have chosen honesty. All of it was still there, compounding quietly the way interest does, not punishing me on a schedule, not building towards some dramatic reckoning, just accumulating, the way things do when you don't deal with them. And the same was true for Caleb. Every dinner table comment, every eye roll, every time he measured me against Richard and found me lacking and let me see that he found me lacking, none of that disappeared either. It just sat in a pile somewhere between us, growing. He thought those moments cost him nothing. That's the thing about contempt. It feels free when you're spending it. The bill comes later. I don't think Caleb is a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He's my son, and I know him. And what I know is that he was afraid. He built an identity on a story that had a flaw in the foundation, and somewhere deep down he knew it. And the knowing made him defensive, and the defensiveness came out sideways, as contempt for the man who actually laid that foundation. That's not evil. That's just what fear does to people when they don't have the tools to look at it directly. What I had to own, and this was harder than the paperwork, harder than any of the legal logistics, was that I had helped build that fear, not by being cruel, by being absent from my own story, a father who never lets his child see who he really is, what he's really built, what it actually cost him. That father is not teaching humility, he's teaching invisibility. He's teaching his child that the quiet men are the lesser men, because the quiet men never correct the record. Caleb needed to know the truth, not as a weapon, not as a lesson I was delivering from a position of superiority, just as the truth. The kind that, once it's out in the open, lets two people actually see each other clearly for maybe the first time. There's something I believe now that I didn't fully believe before all of this. Intelligence isn't just what you know. It's the willingness to look at your own role in a situation honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. Caleb had to do that. I had to do that. Neither one of us got to be entirely right. That's usually how it goes with the things that actually matter. I walked past his office building last week. His name is still on the directory. And I kept walking, and I felt not pride exactly. Something quieter, the particular satisfaction of a man who knows what he built, who needed nothing from anyone to confirm it, and who is, after 68 years, finally done being invisible.